Hi, What the HealthTech listeners. I'm your host this week, Justine Abson. This is the podcast where we tackle some of the trending topics, ideas and best practice in health and social care. This week, we're talking to Georgina Watkinson. Georgina has been a training officer for over 20 years, initially working in the corporate sector before specialising in health and social care for the last 12 years. Georgina has a passion to understand dementia and mental health and has been a mental health first aid trainer since 2019. Hi Georgina, welcome to What the HealthTech.
Hi, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So we're going to talk a little bit today about mental health first aid training. So firstly, Georgina, you're the trainer for mental health first aid at Curve Learning. It'd be great if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about this and why there is such a need for first aid for mental health.
Right, okay, so where we look at mental health first aid training, for me personally, where we work in health and social care, so we've been delivering training on many different courses. But obviously the stress and strain of any kind of work life, especially in health and social care, there does tend to be quite a lot of sickness around that, and it's apparent about the stresses and strains of what the job entails. So we looked into doing mental health first aid as a training course. We went over to Mental Health First Aid England to do the train the trainer with them, and then we put it out there for the health and social care sector to be involved in. But what's quite pleasing, if I'm honest, is that a lot of the customers that we do get onto our sessions are not from care. So it is quite interesting in that, and I do think that with everything that's been going on in the world, there is definitely a need for looking out for somebody else, and this is why it's been really sort of worthwhile doing the courses.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you mentioned there about, the last couple of years in particular. So, we know that, the last 2 years has had a massive effect on the healthcare industry as a whole. How do you think it has impacted on mental health in general? And do you think this means more people need to be aware of how they can help people going through any issues?
Absolutely. The irony about all of the last 2 years, if we'd have not gone into a global pandemic at the time, it was that mental health first aid was going to become a real big drive in health and safety at work. But because of the pandemic, that was put on the back burner. And yet, because of that pandemic, we've seen how much it has affected people in their own lifestyles, in their life, in work, in their personal lives. And it is so important that we can reach out to people and sort of offer the support in that first aid.
I think that's it. I attended the course a little while ago, and it definitely gives you a good overview of how you can help people, and especially like you said, I know a lot of people now that are going through issues. So yeah, it's a really, really useful skill to have. Moving on, you mentioned it was going to become a huge thing in workplaces. So every organisation, has a first aid kit. They have trained first aiders on site, but it does feel like mental health first aid is still quite far behind. What do you think workplaces need to do to sort of tackle this and to make it more of a requirement?
I think we really need to be readdressing the duty of care in all workplaces. We look at the well-being of a person. We look at the physical side of a person's well-being. Yet I think we are missing out on that mental health well-being. And I think until we can address that, the physical side is always going to be affected. We're always going to be then looking at maybe having sickness and, things like this, because we're not addressing that. And I think we do need to look into perhaps the way that HR is looked at, into dealing with, people's personal lives and taking that. It's not just that duty of care 9 to 5 and, whatever you do outside of work, that's your life. It's trying to incorporate it in. It has the impact of what people are going through in their own lives when they are coming into a workplace. So I really do think it needs to be linked in and really sort of thought about how we can support people whilst at work.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point that actually when you mention about, you know, the sickness side, because there can still be stigma in some places when it comes to sickness from mental health compared to sort of physical sickness. Have you got any advice that you would offer workplaces to sort of look into this?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to sort of stop judging and look at the reason why somebody is off sick. And I think being honest about people's workload and life balance, I think really to look at what is going on within that work life and home life. And I think a big thing is the trying to be a little bit more non-judgmental. And from running the courses, from talking to managers who are dealing with the day-to-day running of the business, which we do appreciate has to be, you know, but it's sort of finding out. If we were to think about a lot of sicknesses, it could very well be, excuse me, that somebody may have been out drinking. They may have got a lifestyle that we would not always choose, you know, but it's trying to find out why that's the case. So if somebody is having reoccurring colds and sicknesses, is it perhaps lifestyle? Is there a reason why the lifestyle's impacting the health? And then obviously for the work life as well, you know. So I think a lot around that stigma needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think that why is really important, isn't it? You know, actually really getting down to the sort of the roots of the issue as well, and really understanding where that comes from.
Yeah, and I do think majority of people that I've spoke to, especially in HR, do want to look at it like that. But I suppose there are a lot of pressures on businesses to have a good workforce and a reliable workforce. And it's interesting when we're looking at the subject of bank holidays being brought up, saying that we're having an extra one for the Queen's birthday, and then they're trying to look into putting this into play each year, purely and simply because of the fact we're giving people days off as a bank holiday. It actually helps with the well-being, the productivity of work, you know. So it's not looking at the quantity of how much we're going to do, but actually the quality of what we're going to do and the quality around the staff and supporting the staff, you know. So it is quite interesting at this moment in time that is sort of being thought of.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of talk about sort of 4-day weeks and things like that as well, isn't there? So there's a lot of things are being talked about at the moment.
Just when thinking about the pressures of life, you know, we're living in obviously we've just on the back of COVID, but then there's the extra pressures of all the bills going up, the cost of living going up. And it's almost as though sometimes we need to work more to pay for more, but actually, you know, not saying working less, but having a quality work, then that surely would help a lot of people as well.
Yeah, definitely. So for any of our listeners who don't know what to expect from mental health first aid training, could you give us an overview of what someone on the course could maybe take away from this?
Yeah, I think when people come onto the course, they are obviously there because they want to become mental health first aiders. I think what a lot of people do take away from the course is their own reflecting how they may look into another person's state of mind. And again, that judgmental sort of feeling that we all have, but not in a malicious way. But sometimes I think we look and think we couldn't help. We're not qualified to help. And I think with the course, the course focuses such a lot on, it's not there to diagnose an illness. It is just there to signpost and show that there is that chance of the hope of the recovery and everything. And it's just sort of focusing on just being there to listen to somebody, can be as well as, thinking that, oh my gosh, I'm going to sort of get them to the doctors or anything. It's just that first point can be a huge step for somebody. And I do think a lot of people do reflect on their own prejudgments coming into the course.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of the big things I took away from it was how much you can actually help someone just by listening. And, we sort of all walked away with the big manual with all the reference points and signposts and things like that. And there are so many places to kind of help people that maybe people aren't aware of as well. So it was certainly something I took away from it.
Yeah. And I think just with that as well, we've all been in that same position. I've been in that position where I didn't know that there was all this help out there because it doesn't seem to be advertised as much. It's not doing too bad. We get a little bit more so through social medias, through different outlets, that there are these sort of organisations there to help. But I think just recognising that sometimes we may not have, as we speak about on the course, without sort of mental health, we don't have physical health. And again, it's linking that physical health to the mental health, so your GPs and things like this, where people may not think to go to for the help that's required.
Yeah, and that links really nicely into the fact that, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week, hosted by the Mental Health Foundation. The theme this year is all about raising awareness of the impact of loneliness and the impact that has on our mental well-being, which, can impact anyone at any time, at any age, really. So what are your thoughts on steps which we could take to address this side of things?
I think sometimes what I find is that we sometimes lack that sense of community. I think we can fall into a little bit of our own way of living in our own little bubbles and not really caring about what happens next door. And I think we're always a little bit frightened of sort of almost being a nosy neighbour. And I obviously don't mean that for us to be, but taking care of, saying hello to the next door neighbour, sort of being a little bit kinder to the person that might not be acting the same way as what we might be acting, and just taking note that, your own sort of way around people could have a massive impact on them, and I think that it's just sort of taking care of what we've got around us. And it's like the little pebble, isn't it, in the stream, that it might not change the world, but it just might change somebody's world.
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I think that's a really, really interesting point. We actually spoke to Big Ian Donaghy a couple of weeks ago in the podcast, and he does a lot of work around loneliness and dementia. And he mentioned exactly the same thing. I think he used the quote something like, you can't change the world, but you can change your street, which is exactly the same point you've just made. So yeah, if anybody hasn't listened to that episode, then go back and listen to episode 2, because it is a great listen. So, when it comes down to our listeners and raising awareness of mental health first aid training, if they could do one thing this week to sort of help with that, have you got any sort of suggestions of things that they could do to raise this awareness?
I think to raise awareness and maybe their own awareness is, again, looking to the next person who could be around them, not making those judgments that we, as I've said, we all do make judgments. It's how we act on those judgments, So it's being a little bit kinder to the next person. And I think sometimes there are information that can be sort of looked into with regards to different mental health conditions and illnesses. And I think sometimes just having a little bit of information on what things are could either help themselves, it could help their family, but certainly to talk. Make sure that people are talking about things and not shying away from the mental health of another person or for themselves, and not to feel the shame and the guilt around mental health. Without, as we do say on the course, there is no health without mental health. And mental health is not a negative. We all have mental health. Some people will have illnesses, some people won't. So I think it's to talk and to share their own experiences.
Yeah, I think the one of the things I noticed when I was on the course was how many different people were actually on there. So, I think there was about 10 people on when I came on it, and you had different people from different workplaces, but then you also had people that sort of came onto it off their own backs, that wanted to kind of do it for their own personal development because they might know someone who's gone through some issues and they don't know how to deal with it. And I think that was really interesting to sort of see how many different people were actually on the course as well.
Yeah, and I think with the course as well, where we've mentioned about physical first aid, I think it's interesting as well. People are always willing to either download first aid apps, they're willing to sort of go on to physical first aid courses. And something that always really keeps with me from all the training that I do with mental health is the saying that you are more likely to be rubbing shoulders with somebody that's having suicidal thoughts than that's going to need CPR. But we do focus more on that. So sometimes I think to, have a look at what sort of apps are there and to understand your own mental health and things like this. I think that's the way going forward when it comes to helping others and themselves. And I think that's something really that I get out from the courses that I see people coming on with as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that, you play a lot of videos and things like that as well to kind of show two different elements. So someone can be having a bit of a psychotic episode, for example, and the video will show two different reactions to it. And I think that's really interesting to see how, the best way to react compared to how you shouldn't react. And again, it's that understanding those things that you can do to help that person.
Absolutely. And I found even with my own self, the way that I speak to my own children, sometimes being a mum, I think sometimes being a mum, we can be feeling that we've got the entitlement to be a bit judgy around our children and mine are adults now. But sometimes I even watch for how I might ask a question now, So I think it's something that I've picked up on from that. Like you say, the videos they show the scenarios of two different people. And unfortunately, the way that we shouldn't do it, if we're honest, is probably the way that we'd see it done most.
Yeah, it is, and that was definitely the reaction from the room, I think, when we watched it as well. So, yeah, I'm hoping that we can definitely change some of those stigmas and judgments the more we kind of learn about this stuff.
Absolutely, yes.
So what do you think, we mentioned earlier on in the episode about it becoming a bit more of a requirement in the workplaces. What do you think really needs to change for mental health first aid to be seen as something really integral, and how can we all help to shape that?
I think once we sort of can say that COVID is going a little bit and we're getting back into normal, I think it is looking at that health and safety at work and thinking about it sort of more with that mental and physical health. And I think it's something that in workplaces we do really need to think about. And it's like if we start to change the way that we are at home, that'd naturally change the way that we are at work. And I think that'd be the same if we change things at work. We would naturally change the way that we are at home as well. So I think health and safety is a big part. I think it really does need to focus. But I also think the managers need to be looking into the health and safety and not doing it just like a tick box exercise. I think it really does need to be sort of incorporated into with HR, recruitment, and then the daily running of businesses and things like this.
Yeah, and I think it's slowly becoming more well known within workplaces, isn't it? With things like this course, and the more people that come on it, the more people will have awareness of kind of that sort of thing, I guess.
Yeah. And I think from the younger sort of people, they I think understand mental health a lot more than people of my age. So I think it will turn, it will be a more natural process where people do consider other people's mental health a lot differently as to what maybe my generation have done. But we just need we need, the schools and education and workplaces to all be involved to bring it then into communities and things.
Yeah, schools is a really useful point, actually. Like you said, as younger people sort of come through, and with things like social media and things like that these days, again, there's a lot more pressure, I think, than there ever used to be. So it is going to become, more common, if you like, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, definite.
Yeah. Thanks, Georgina. So at the end of every episode, we ask everybody about their What the Health Tech moment. So this question's a bit of fun. We want to hear all your weird and wonderful stories across health and social care. I guess obviously, being a trainer, you've probably got all sorts that you've experienced at some point. So have you got anything that has really impacted you, or anything weird and wonderful that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Oh, blimey. Weird and wonderful. I've done training courses in all different areas all throughout the United Kingdom. Some weird and wonderful times I've had. I once had to do a manual handling course in a convent with nuns, and they did have carers. It was a retirement home for the nuns, but the nuns, still massively active and wanting to be quite independent, were joining the manual handling course. So I suppose I've never really had to sort of use a hoist with sort of fully dressed nuns. That was something quite different, but I think it'll stay with me for some time.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like something you'll forget in a hurry.
No. And that's probably one of the nicer stories.
Oh, thanks, Georgina. I think, to kind of talk about such a complex topic, the more we can all do to raise awareness and understand the impact of mental health is fundamental. I know from my own experience, I'd certainly recommend the mental health first aid course, particularly for anybody that is in a people-focused role. I found it so informative, and I definitely had a much better understanding of it in terms of how I could help someone in the future. So thank you very much for joining us and kind of talking about, like I said, such a complex topic.
No, thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
So thanks for joining us, and thank you to everybody for listening. Next week, we're back speaking to Marcus Manhurst, who's heading up the Learning from Patient Safety Events project for NHS Improvement, and Paul Ewers, Risk Manager at Milton Keynes University Hospitals NHS Trust, to continue the conversation about the implementation of LFPSE and to talk about what we've all learned along the way. Don't forget to rate and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have any questions for us or our guests or Georgina, please email whatthehealthtech@radarhealthcare.com.